The night was unusually cold for early October in the small town of Millfield. A dense fog clung to the narrow streets, muffling the usual hum of late-night traffic and cloaking the rows of ageing Victorian homes in shadow. At precisely 11:43 p.m, the calm was shattered by a single desperate call to 911, a voice barely above a whisper, trembling with fear. "Please, you have to come. There's someone here. They're hurt. They're still breathing, but I don't know how long." The dispatcher's calm voice barely registered with the caller before the line went dead. When officers arrived at 42 Willow Lane, the sight that greeted them was something they would not forget. A young woman, her blonde hair soaked with rain and tangled with leaves, lay crumpled on the front steps of the old house. Her eyes fluttered open, filled with confusion and pain, but she was alive barely. Her shallow breaths, ragged and irregular, were the only indication she clung to life. "Who did this to you?" the officer asked urgently as he crouched beside her. The woman tried to speak, but only a rasp escaped. Then, with a faint gesture, she reached out toward the doorway. Inside the house was silent, eerily so. The walls, once vibrant with colour and life, were now stained with streaks of something darker. The floorboards creaked underfoot, and an unsettling chill filled the air, as if the house itself held its breath. Detective Evelyn Hart arrived on the scene within the hour. Her reputation for solving cold cases was well known, but this was unlike anything she'd seen before. There was a story here hidden beneath layers of secrets and lies, and the victim was the key. The woman was rushed to the hospital unconscious before arrival, but still clinging to life. The preliminary report was grim, multiple blunt force injuries, signs of strangulation, but somehow against all odds she had survived long enough for help to find her. The victim's identity was unknown. No wallet, no phone, no ID. Nothing but a worn silver locket around her neck bearing the initials EM. As the hours passed, Detective Hart and her team began the painstaking work of canvassing the neighbourhood. Neighbours reported hearing muffled sounds, cries, the unmistakable thud of a struggle. One elderly man claimed he saw a shadowy figure running from the house just moments before the call was made. Another spoke of a strange car parked nearby, its engine left running. But then a chilling discovery: the house itself had no record of recent occupancy. The last owner had vanished months ago without a trace, and yet someone had been living there. Someone desperate. The hospital called Detective Hart with the first break while the victim could not yet speak. She had managed to write a single word on a piece of paper: trust. But whom and why? The case that would grip Millfield and the world beyond was just beginning. A victim still breathing secrets buried in silence, and a detective who would stop at nothing to uncover the truth. And then, as the night deepened, a second call came in, this time from a frantic voice claiming to be connected to the victim, and warning that the danger was far from over. The shadow lurking in Millfield was watching, and it was coming back. Detective Evelyn Hart stood outside the hospital room, her breath fogging in the cold autumn air. The word trust, scrawled hastily on the torn piece of paper, weighed heavily in her hand like a fragile lifeline thrown in the dark. Inside, the woman, pale and fragile, lay silent, connected to machines that beeped and hummed in rhythm with her uncertain heartbeat. Doctors said she was stable but not out of danger. Her injuries were severe bruises that painted her skin in angry purples, fractured ribs and a throat that bore the unmistakable marks of strangulation. The victim's silence was both a curse and a mystery. Hart's mind raced. Who was this woman? Why had she been attacked? And why had the attacker left her alive barely? The detective's phone buzzed sharply. It was Officer Marcus, her partner, on the ground. "We found something at the scene," he said, voice low tense. "A set of fingerprints on the back door. They don't match any in our database. But here's the kicker. The door was locked from the inside. Whoever it was had a key, or was let in." Hart frowned. That meant the victim either knew her attacker or someone else was involved. Someone they hadn't met yet. Back at the precinct, the forensic team sent the fingerprints through the national system, no hits. The locket's engraving EM was still a puzzle. No missing person reports matched the description or the initials. Then came a call from the hospital. The victim had opened her eyes for the first time since arriving. They wheeled her into a private room and Hart was there. "Can you tell me your name?" she asked softly. The woman's voice was a whisper, cracked and faint. "Emily? Morgan?" It was a start. Over the next few days, Emily's memory returned in fragments, shattered scenes of a life half remembered. She spoke of a man she trusted, someone she called Michael. Though her description was hazy, her emotions tangled with fear and confusion. "He said he would protect me," Emily murmured one night, eyes wide and haunted. But then, it all turned dark. Hart's team dug into the name Michael, cross-referencing with known associates of Emily Morgan, but no definitive lead emerged. Then, a startling twist, a local woman came forward claiming to be Emily's sister Sarah. Sarah painted a picture of a quiet, unassuming woman who had moved to Millfield 6 months prior, seeking a fresh start after leaving a troubled relationship. She warned Hart that Michael was dangerous, violent and possessive, and that Emily had tried to escape him. But there was no police record of Michael, no formal complaints, just whispered warnings. Then the evidence began to mount. Surveillance footage from a nearby gas station showed a man matching Michael's description, buying a large quantity of cleaning supplies hours before the attack. But he was nowhere to be found now. The town was on edge. Rumours spread who was this man. Was he still nearby? Was Emily truly safe? And then the unthinkable happened. Emily disappeared from the hospital. The security cameras showed no forced entry or exit. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. Detective Hart was left with more questions than answers. The victim was still breathing, but was she still alive? And who had taken her? As the fog settled once more over Millfield, the sinister truth began to unravel, one that would challenge everything they thought they knew about trust betrayal and the darkness that lives just beneath the surface. Detective Evelyn Hart slammed her palm on the cold metal table in the precinct's interrogation room. Emily Morgan alive, one moment gone the next, had vanished without a trace from a locked hospital room. No sign of forced entry, no security breach, nothing. The hospital's security footage revealed only a shadow too fleeting and blurry to identify gliding past the cameras at exactly 2:17 a.m. The hospital staff was baffled. No alarms triggered, no doors left ajar. It was as if Emily had walked through walls. Hart's instinct screamed that this was no ordinary disappearance. Something or someone was orchestrating this with chilling precision. She returned to Emily's apartment on Willow Lane, now a crime scene. The place was eerily pristine, no signs of struggle, no hurried packing. But under the sink in the bathroom, forensic investigators uncovered something unexpected. A small blood-stained handkerchief embroidered with the initials M.H. Michael Hart, was this a coincidence or was the name real? Hart's phone buzzed again. It was Sarah, Emily's sister. Detective, I don't know who else to trust. I received a text from Emily's phone. It says, "Help me, he's watching." But the message was sent after her disappearance. The message chilled Hart to the bone. If Emily was sending texts, was she truly missing, or was this a trap? As they dug deeper into Michael's background, disturbing facts emerged. He had vanished from public records years ago, leaving behind a trail of broken relationships, anonymous accusations of abuse, and shadowy financial dealings. His last known address was an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town, a place local kids whispered about but no one dared approach. Hart assembled a team to investigate the warehouse under cover of darkness. Inside, they found remnants of a life-erased old photographs, children's toys and a wall scrawled with frantic notes. Trust no one. She's alive. The victim was still breathing. The discovery raised more questions than answers. Suddenly the team's radios crackled with frantic warnings. Movement was detected outside. Before they could react, a figure appeared in the doorway, a man gaunt and wild-eyed. He stared directly at Hart. "I'm not who you think I am," he rasped. "But if you want to find Emily, you need to listen." The man's name was Daniel Cole, a former acquaintance of Michael Hart. He claimed to hold the key to the twisted web of lies binding Emily's fate. But as Daniel unravelled his story, Hart realised the nightmare was far from over. Trust was a fragile thing in Millfield, and the victim was still breathing but caught in a game darker than anyone could imagine. The final words Daniel uttered before vanishing into the night sent a chill down Hart's spine. "They're closer than you think, and they're coming for you next." The rain had begun again, fat droplets hammering the cracked windows of Detective Hart's car as she sat in the warehouse parking lot. Daniel Cole's confession echoed in her mind. "They're closer than you think, and they're coming for you next." His face, pale, haunted her thoughts, but Hart knew she had to press forward. Inside the warehouse, forensic teams combed every inch for clues. The scrawled messages and personal items hinted at an obsessive fixation. Michael Hart wasn't merely a jealous ex. He was something far more dangerous. And someone else was pulling strings. Hart walked the dimly lit corridor's flashlight cutting through the gloom. A distant drip of water, the faint rustle of rats in the rafters, but no answers. Yet every corner of this place felt alive, as if it remembered the horrors it sheltered. Detective Marcus's voice crackled over the radio. "You need to see this." In a back room under a collapsed tarp lay a battered filing cabinet. Its drawers were forced open documents strewn across the floor, bank statements, anonymous letters, and a ledger marked Project Aurora. The name alone sent a chill through Hart's spine. Project Aurora, she murmured, flipping through pages. Each entry was dated detailing sums of money transferred to an untraceable offshore account. Most transactions referenced a codename EM, alongside phrases like containment and termination. Containment, termination. Words that suggested Michael wasn't acting alone, he was part of an organisation with protocols, budgets and targets. They loaded as much as they could into evidence bags. Outside, Hart's phone rang. It was Dr. Reynolds, the physician treating Emily. "Detective, you need to come to the hospital." His voice was trembling. "There's been an incident." Hart's heart pounded as she raced back through the rain-slicked streets to Millfield General. Inside, the foyer was swarming with officers and panicked staff. She darted to the nurses' station. "What happened?" she demanded. One of the nurses pointed toward the corridor leading to the patient rooms. They found Dr. Kim in Emily's room. He's been attacked. Hart charged down the hall. The lights flickered overhead, casting long shadows. At the end of the corridor stood Dr. Kim, kneeling beside his colleague Dr. Reynolds, who was slumped against the wall, blood pooling beneath him. He was checking on the patient, Kim whispered, voice shaking. He said he'd felt someone watching. Reynolds' eyes fluttered open. "Detective." They came through the vent. I heard whispers. Michael isn't acting alone. His words trailed off as his eyes closed again. Hart scanned the ceiling vents. Each grille was battered, showing signs of forced entry. Someone had infiltrated the hospital room, directly targeting Emily and anyone who got too close. A chill settled in Hart's bones. If the attackers could breach a locked hospital room via the vents, no place was safe. And now they knew Hart's team was closing in on Project Aurora. She straightened, her jaw clenched. "Lock down this floor. No one in or out without my say-so." As officers rushed to secure the area, Hart's gaze drifted to a small ventilation duct above Reynolds' bed. She crouched, peering inside with her flashlight. At the back, half hidden in shadow, was a scrap of paper. She reached up with gloved fingers and pulled it free. Unfolded, it revealed a hastily drawn map of the hospital's lower levels with a single room circled in red morgue. A cold realization struck her. Emily Morgan wasn't the only one at risk. The morgue door could be unlocked. Refrigerated, silent, an ideal place to hide or dispose of someone. Hart stared at the map, her breath catching. If Emily was moved there alive or dead, she'd be lost forever. Footsteps echoed behind her. She whirled to see Officer Marcus, pale and unsettled. "Detective, we got another 911 call. It's from Willow Lane. Someone's screaming." Hart's pulse thundered. "Tell me they said who?" Marcus shook his head. Just screams, then silence. The line went dead. A frigid wind seemed to cut through the hallway as Hart rose. She slid the map into her pocket, eyes blazing. "Find me whatever we can on Project Aurora," she ordered. "Then meet me at Willow Lane in 5 minutes. And Marcus, be careful. Whoever's behind this won't hesitate." As Hart raced out of the hospital, thunder rumbled overhead. Somewhere in the darkness, Project Aurora's agents were 2 steps ahead, strategizing, watching, waiting. And in the cold embrace of the morgue, something waited too. A faint rhythmic tapping like a heartbeat. The wail of the siren faded into the night as Detective Hart's unmarked SUV skidded onto Willow Lane. The street lamps flickered like dying stars and the fog curled around the gnarled tree trunks. In the distance, the old Morgan house loomed a silhouette of peeling paint and broken windows. Another scream had cut through the night, fractured and desperate. Hart jumped from the car reins, slicking her coat. Officer Marcus met her at the front gate, his face pale under the hood of his raincoat. "Over here," he whispered, leading her toward the porch. On the stoop lay Sarah Morgan, clutching her side as crimson bloomed through her fingers. Her eyes were glassy with shock. "Detective," she gasped. "I tried to protect her, but they—" "Slow down," Hart said, crouching beside her. Marcus applied a tourniquet while Hart pressed a gloved hand to Sarah's wounds. One of the nurses from the hospital sprinted up, grabbing Sarah's other arm. They lifted her gently and carried her inside Hart's SUV to get her to the emergency room. Hart stood alone on the porch, listening to the wind. The front door was ajar. She drew her weapon and slipped inside. The foyer was a gallery of decay, torn wallpaper, muddy footprints, a child's shoe abandoned beneath the stairwell. The faint stench of bleach lingered. On the wall beside the door, scrawled in what looked like a single shaky hand, were the words, "They're coming." Hart's flashlight beam danced across the room. Something glinted on the floor by the entryway, a small black USB drive. She bagged it as evidence. A metallic clang echoed upstairs. Hart's pulse quickened. She ascended the narrow staircase, each step creaking under her weight. At the top, the hallway stretched into darkness. Doors lined either side, some hanging off their hinges, others locked tight. She approached Emily's old bedroom. The brass knob was cold to her touch. Inside, the sheets were twisted into knots. Pillows slashed and a single photograph lay on the floor. Emily's smiling arms around a man with dark hair, Michael presumably. Someone had cut his face away with a razor, leaving only Emily's torn smile. Hart kept moving. At the end of the hall, the bathroom door was ajar, light spilling through. She ducked inside and froze. The mirror was cracked. Across the shards, someone had traced a message in blood-red lipstick. Trust no one. Beneath it, a smear of footprints led back toward the door. Just then, her radio buzzed. "Detective, we're picking up movement in the yard," Marcus said. She turned, hand on her holster, and saw a figure crouched low behind a bush. The headlights of her SUV caught the glint of a gun barrel. Before she could shout, a shot rang out. Hart dove behind a fallen flower pot as the bullet shattered the banister. Then silence broken by the scurry of feet disappearing into the fog. She stumbled down the stairs, firing a warning shot into the air. "Please stop." But the only reply was the echo of her own heartbeat. Minutes later, backed by arriving officers, she secured the perimeter. No sign of the shooter. No footprints except hers. The night seemed to swallow every clue. Hart exhaled, wiping rainwater from her brow. She held the USB drive tight. Whatever was on it, it was connected to Project Aurora and to Emily's nightmare. But as the mist closed in, she realized there was someone still inside the house. A faint tapping. The hospital morgue was hushed corridors of stainless steel, the air unnaturally cold like the inside of a tomb. Hart had slipped in under cover of the lockdown, following the map she'd found in Dr. Reynolds' room. Each step echoed. She reached the morgue's main door, a heavy insulated slab with a small window. The light inside was off, but through the frosted glass she saw rows of drawers, each labelled with a name, a date. And near the back, one drawer was slightly ajar. Hart pressed an ear to the door. The tapping was louder now, rhythmic, deliberate, like Morse code. Tap, tap, pause, tap. Her breath caught. It was too precise to be random. Someone alive was trapped inside. She yanked the door handle, it wouldn't move. The latch was secured from the inside. Frantically, Hart checked for an override switch on the wall. There was none. The only exit was a small panel on the drawer itself. She pushed it open and wriggled through the narrow space. Inside the morgue, she pulled open the nearest drawer. It was empty. The next empty. Drawer after drawer revealed only cold, inert bodies. The tapping continued, a heartbeat in the silence. At last she reached the half-open drawer and back. Hart hesitated. Voice low. "Emily, are you in there?" No answer, just the tapping. She grasped the handle and pulled. The drawer slid open to reveal not Emily Morgan, but a lifeless form wrapped in white linen. Hart's stomach lurched. That wasn't Emily's body. It was someone else. Someone recently deceased. This body's tag still hung loose, name unreadable in the dim light. The tapping shifted higher from above her. Hart snapped her head up to see the ceiling vent. The grille had been pried open. She holstered her weapon and climbed onto the drawer, pressing her ear to the vent. The tapping came again. Tap. Tap. Slower. Then a whisper. "Help me." Her heart thundered. It was a child's voice, faint, terrified. Up here, the voice trembled. Hart stood on tiptoe, peering into the duct. Darkness stretched inward, but she could see two tiny shoes wedged against the metal flange. A child, hidden in the vents. "Hang on," Hart whispered. She ran back to the door and forced her radio. "Marcus, I found someone in the vents of the morgue, child. I need a pry bar now." A distant voice crackled, "On our way, detective." Hart knelt before the vent opening. The tapping resumed, this time urgent, desperate. "Detective Hart, don't trust them. Project Aurora won't let me go." The voice cut off. Hart's jaw tightened. She took a deep breath, slid her hand into the vent and felt a small wrist. "Got you," she said, voice trembling. She began to pull the child free when behind her the morgue door slammed shut with a deafening boom. The lights flickered on, and Hernandez and Kim's bodies lay sprawled on the floor. Footsteps thundered down the corridor. Hart shielded the child with her body, heart pounding. Somebody wanted the secret in the morgue buried, and they'd just sealed the room. Tap, 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 the rhythm of a ticking clock. And at that moment, Hart realized Project Aurora had anticipated her every move. Someone was about to turn the key. Detective Evelyn Hart's pulse thundered in her ears as the morgue lights flickered. The heavy steel door, now sealed, pressed coldly against her back. Somewhere down the hallway, shouts and hurried footsteps echoed. drowned by the relentless hum of the refrigerated room. She clutched the small wrist in her gloved hand, the child's slender arm trembling against her chest. "Detective, please," the child whispered, voice quivering. "They'll—" Hart swallowed hard, forcing calm. "I've got you. I promise we're getting out." Behind her, the bodies of Dr. Kim and Dr. Reynolds lay grotesquely still, their uniforms stained dark. She risked a glance down the corridor. Shadows danced along the walls as someone approached with heavy boots. Hart's mind raced. No time to identify the intruder, no time to secure the room properly. She had to get the child out now. With her free hand, Hart ripped open the vent grill farther, the metal screeching in protest. The duct above was narrow, collapsing slightly under her weight. She gritted her teeth and hoisted herself in, dragging the child behind her. The cool, stale air of the vent swallowed them as they wriggled into darkness. The door behind them banged again, this time with someone's shoulder, static violence that shook the steel frame. Hart felt the child press closer as she crawled forward, peering through the thin strip of space. Ahead, the duct led to a maintenance corridor that connected to the hospital basement. Her flashlight lay on the morgue floor. Hart cursed and blinked against the pitch black. She extracted her service weapon from its holster, balancing it awkwardly as she inched forward. A low sob escaped the child. Hart whispered, "We'll find Dr. Lin. She'll know where to go." The child's name, Layla, had been murmured just before Hart hoisted her inside. Footsteps thundered behind the morgue door. The intruders were methodical. They would hunt every corridor, check every access point. Hart pressed on her gun arm, straining. Suddenly the duct opened onto the basement boiler room. Pipes groaned and steam hissed in the shadows. Hart slipped through, pulling Layla with her, and crouched behind a rusted water tank. She paused, listening. The distant pounding of boots on concrete was growing louder. Layla gasped, voice tiny. They saw us." Hart swallowed, forcing steady breath. She pressed her ear to the tank, counting. 3, 4, 5. The footsteps stopped just outside the heavy double doors leading down here. She peeked around the tank, a trio of men in dark suits. Project Aurora agents, by their tailored earpieces and clipped badges, patted themselves down, scanning the room. Hart's mind raced. The boiler room had only 2 exits, the duct they'd just come through, and the double doors leading to the service elevator. She needed a plan, and fast. A shrill alarm began to wail somewhere above. Hart realized someone had triggered the emergency code, likely Sarah's imaging in the ER. The basement lights flickered. The agents tensed. Hart whispered fiercely to Layla, "Stay silent and stay close." She drew her service radio. "Marcus, get a team to the basement entrance. Code red, immediate backup." The radio crackled. "Copy that, Detective." She glanced at the agents, one checking the duct grill, another heading toward the elevator doors, and the third raising his hand to call in. Hart had seconds. She raised her gun and fired 2 careful shots at the agent nearest the grill. His body slumped against the metal, a muffled thud echoing in the boiler room. The others dove for cover guns drawn. Police Hart barked. "Drop your weapons." She stepped forward. Layla pressed behind her eyes, wide with terror. One agent fired the bullet, ricocheting off a pipe with a shriek. Hart dove behind the tank, dragging Layla down. They both hit the cold concrete floor, dust swirling around them. Through the steam, Hart caught a glimpse of the service elevator doors. They were sliding open. The remaining 2 agents bolted toward the shaft, weapons raised. Hart scrambled to her feet, dragging Layla with her. "Now, Layla," she hissed. Footsteps pounded on the opposite side of the tank. Hart grabbed her radio, yelled, "Elevator, stop them!" then sprinted toward the opening. Layla stumbled, but Hart caught her arm. They burst through the elevator opening just as the doors slid shut. Hart pressed herself against the wall, heart racing as the elevator shuddered and ascended. In the darkness above, she heard the angry voices of the agents, frustrated. Hart swallowed the lump in her throat, pressing the button to call the elevator back down. "Hold on," she whispered to Layla, who clutched her side, tears streaming. The doors reopened, revealing an empty shaft. Hart faded back in, pulling Layla inside. She activated the panel to bring them to the lobby. The elevator descended with juddering speed. As they dropped through the floors, Hart pressed her gun into her jacket, which bore the emblem of Millfield PD. When the doors hissed open at the lobby level, flashlights and uniforms flooded the shaft. Officers formed a protective half-circle as Hart and Layla emerged, rain still dripping from their coats. Hart handed Layla to a nurse she recognized, a trusted member of the crisis team who enveloped the child in a blanket. The nurse's eyes locked with Hart's rescue relief, but also dread. Hart scanned the lobby, every entrance and exit sealed. She exhaled, voice quiet but firm, "Secure the hospital." and find out who triggered the code red. Then, in the hum of fluorescent lights, Hart noticed someone standing near the reception desk. A woman in a crisp suit, arms folded, gaze unwavering. Her badge read Aurora Foundation. Hart's blood ran cold. She took a step forward, then paused. The woman reached into her jacket and slid an envelope across the desk to a trembling orderly. The orderly glanced up at Hart, eyes wide. He swallowed, hands shaking, and tucked the envelope into his pocket. Hart moved toward him. "So give me that envelope." He tried to back away but bumped the reception desk. The woman from Aurora glided forward, voice soft and deadly calm. "Detective Hart, congratulations on your perseverance, but I'm afraid you're in over your head." Hart's jaw tightened. "What's in that envelope?" she demanded. The woman's lips curved into a smile. A list, she said. Names of everyone associated with Emily Morgan. The final piece of Project Aurora. The orderly pressed it into Hart's hands. The paper inside was short, a list of 10 names. The final name chilled her to the core. Detective Evelyn Hart. Hart stared at the inked letters as the lights flickered and the envelope slipped from her numb fingers. A single name on that list had one purpose, a target, and Hart realized with sickening certainty that Project Aurora had just put her name at the top. She looked up at the woman, voice low and hard. "You'll pay for this." The Aurora agent's smile faded. "We'll see who pays, Detective. You'll see." Behind them, the hospital doors locked with an ominous click, sealing Hart inside. And somewhere in the dark recesses of Project Aurora's labyrinth, the final move was being made. Detective Evelyn Hart's breath came in ragged gasps as the reception doors sealed behind her with a hydraulic hiss. The soft click echoed through the deserted lobby, leaving only the low hum of fluorescent lights and the distant beeping of monitors. In her hand, the envelope trembled 10 names scrawled in neat, precise script. Her own name sat at the bottom, an executioner's roll call. Across from her, the Aurora agent, tall, immaculately dressed, eyes cold as obsidian, tilted her head. "You're out of time, Detective," she purred. "Your every move has been anticipated. You either join us, or you become another entry on that list." Hart's jaw clenched. Every instinct screamed to reach for her weapon, but it lay secured in the SUV outside. Instead, she folded her fists. "Where's Emily Morgan?" she demanded. "And my name, what does it mean?" The agent's lips curved into something like pity. "Emily is safe, for now. As for you," she leaned in, "it's your turn to prove your loyalty." With a subtle flick of her wrist, the agent signalled the orderly. He retrieved a single sheet of paper from inside his lab coat and handed it to Hart. Hart unfolded it to reveal a photograph of Emily Morgan lying unconscious in a dimly lit room bound to a hospital gurney. Her face was bruised lips, swollen eyes closed. A single overhead lamp cast her in stark clinical light. Heart-pounding Hart raised her gaze. "Where is this?" "Room 312, the agent whispered. "South wing mid-level. The doors are locked, codes changed." But she glanced down at Hart's badge. "You have one way in." The agent slipped a small black card into Hart's palm. "Access this door. Go alone. Bring her to me. Or watch her die." Hart curled her hand around the card, the leather cold and smooth. She forced herself to breathe. "And if I refuse?" The agent shook her head. "I'm afraid you won't have the choice." She turned on her heel, her black heels clicking on the polished floor as she walked away. The orderlies dispersed, leaving Hart alone in the sterile cavern. A cold dread wrapped around Hart's spine. Every exit was sealed, every CCTV feed under Aurora surveillance. Her only chance was to play along, at least for now. She slid the access card into her pocket and moved toward the elevators. In the silence, she could almost hear the ticking of a countdown. Each second brought Emily closer to danger, and her own name closer to the end. The elevator doors comprised slowly in a puff of stale air. Hart stepped inside, pressing the button for the 3rd floor. The ride felt interminable, the walls pressing in. She closed her eyes, recalling every detail of the morgue rescue, every flash of Layla's terrified face. If she failed this test, there would be no redemption. On floor 3, the hallway lights were dimmed, bulbs flickering as if in warning. Doors lined each side, labelled in faint vinyl numbers. Hart found room 312 at the far end. The electronic lock glowed red. She passed the black card over the reader. It clicked green. The door slid open to reveal a narrow corridor beyond a makeshift passage that led into an old wing of the hospital long since sealed off from the public. The carpet was stained, the walls scarred by peeling paint. A single emergency bulb illuminated the path. Hart inhaled, weapon drawn, and stepped into the corridor. Each footstep echoed. At the end, a heavy wooden door stood slightly ajar, light spilling through the gap. She pushed it open. Inside was a small treatment room. Medical equipment lined the walls, anesthesia machine, EKG monitor, surgical tools. In the centre, under a bright surgical light, lay Emily Morgan on a gurney. Her breathing was shallow, the ventilator's hiss the only sound. She was draped with a sheet cut away to expose a bruise spreading across her throat. A figure stood at Emily's side, face obscured by a surgical mask. He looked up, eyes cold and unfeeling. "Detective Hart," he whispered. His voice was distorted by the mask, but familiar. Dr. Daniel Kim. Hart froze. He had helped her recover Emily, until he'd turned up dead in the morgue. Now he stood alive, complicit. Kim straightened the sheet. "Project Aurora spares no one. You have 1 minute to move her from this wing. Then I close this door. Permanently." He held a remote in his hand, a red button just inches from his thumb. Hart's mind spun. The surgical light shimmered off his mask. The metal gleamed in her eyes. She took a measured step forward. "Why are you doing this?" His gaze didn't waver. Because the Aurora Foundation doesn't tolerate loose ends. Because Emily's knowledge of Project Aurora makes her a liability. He shrugged. "And so might you." Hart swallowed. She was out of options. With shaking hands, she moved to the gurney, gently lifting Emily's leg to slide aboard beneath her. The ventilator's alarm began to beep low battery. "How much time?" Hart whispered. Kim glanced at his watch. 3 minutes, detective. Then I'll cut the power and the monitors." Hart slipped her arm beneath Emily's shoulders and began dragging the gurney toward the door. Emily's breathing grew more erratic, the beeps more insistent. A sudden noise behind Hart's metallic creak of the door ceiling. She spun. The wooden door had clicked shut. Hart's heart seized. Kim pressed the button. The corridor network behind them plunged into darkness. Only the surgical light remained. Hart rattled the door handle, locked. Kim's footsteps were slow, deliberate. He flicked off the surgical light, plunging the room into semi-darkness. Green emergency bulbs flickered on the ceiling, casting long shadows. "Detective," he called softly, "time's up." The ventilator's alarm reached a frantic pitch. Hart wiped sweat from her brow and yanked a nearby tool tray against the door. It wouldn't hold long. She glanced at the window, a narrow, high-up opening with bars. Maybe she could force it, or slip Emily through. Then the monitors flatlined a single long tone, and silence. Emily's chest lay still under the sheet. Hart's blood ran cold. She slammed her fist into the door. No, she pressed her ear to the wood. Nothing but the distant hum of hushed voices. But then a faint exhale. Hart's head snapped back to Emily. Her fingers fluttered, a single gasp cracking through the silence. She was alive, barely. Hart seized the sheet, letting it drop. Emily's eyes opened, panicked, searching. Hart met her gaze. "It's me," she whispered. "I'm here." Kim's silhouette appeared in the doorway, dim light behind him. "You've cost yourself, detective," he said. "Remember, you're on the list now." Hart turned her back on Kim and raced to the window. With a cry, she lifted Emily, pressing her against the bars. "Hold on." She slammed her shoulder into the frame. Wood splintered below. The bars bent under her weight. With a final heave, she forced Emily through the narrow gap. Emily collapsed onto the corridor floor on the other side. Hart scrambled after her, cutting her hand on the jagged wood but ignoring the pain. They tumbled back into the corridor. Hart yanked Emily into her arms. Kim's shout echoed as he lunged through the door too late. Hart and Emily vanished into the dim hallway. Behind them, the surgical room door groaned open, its lock hanging broken. But the corridor was empty. Only the emergency lights remained flickering with an ominous pulse. Hart pressed Emily's small form against her chest and bolted down the hall. And somewhere behind her, the echo of Kim's boots began to follow. Detective Evelyn Hart's boots pounded against the peeling linoleum as she sprinted down the abandoned wing. Emily Morgan's fragile body pressed against her side. Each gasp from Emily sent a stab of guilt through Hart's chest. She'd promised safety. And now the hospital corridors, once a sanctuary, had become a cage. Behind them, Dr. Kim's heavy footsteps echoed in pursuit, his lab coat flapping like a dark flag. Hart rounded a corner into a vaulted hallway where arched windows, long sealed, framed inky darkness. The emergency lights overhead flickered in time with her racing pulse. She paused at a service elevator, its doors smeared with rust. The control panel was dead, no light, no response. Hart slammed her fist against the steel. "Damn it!" Emily whimpered, clutching Hart's collar. Through a gap in the peeling paint, Hart spotted the maintenance stairwell. She slipped through a rusted grille and guided Emily down a spiralling stairwell, each step groaning with age. Behind them, a single shot rang out. The bullet gouged a chunk of concrete where Hart had stood moments before. They reached the basement level, a labyrinth of supply closets and utility shafts that ran beneath the hospital. The chill was suffocating. Pools of stagnant water reflected leaking pipes overhead. Hart ducked under a steam valve, her flashlight beam wavering in the gloom. Over here, Emily gasped, pointing toward an open hatch set into the floor. A narrow ladder descended into pitch-black darkness. Hart hesitated only an instant before sliding Emily onto her hip and climbing down. They landed in the subterranean service tunnel walls of bare concrete overhead conduit stretching into a distant vanishing point. The air was damp, the hum of the hospital muted above. Hart pressed Emily's back against the wall and peered down the tunnel, the beam of her flashlight dwindling into inky oblivion. A synth voice crackled through Hart's earpiece. "Detective Hart, this is Officer Marcus. We've secured the north entrance. How copy?" She exhaled, voice low. "Copy, Marcus. I'm in a tunnel with Emily, heading east toward the old loading bay. Meet me there." On our way came the reply, followed by static. Hart pocketed her radio. "Stay close," she whispered to Emily. "We're almost out." They crept forward, the flashlight revealing spray-painted arrows faded orange, pointing the way to a large metal door. As they approached, Hart noticed footprints in the dust bear small, childlike, Layla's. The child she'd rescued in the morgue must have been brought here too. Hart's throat tightened. Whoever had taken Emily had also captured Layla. She forced the thought aside and pressed her ear to the door. Voices murmured on the other side, a man and a young girl. "Detective Hart," the girl's voice quavered. "Is that you?" Layla Hart hissed, opening the door. The corridor beyond was illuminated by a single flickering bulb. Layla stood by a stack of crates, arms wrapped around herself. Beside her, Daniel Cole lay bound to a chair, bruised but conscious. Hart sprinted forward, cutting Cole's ropes. He slumped forward, eyes glazed, then blinked up at her. "You found me," he rasped. "Can you walk?" Hart asked. Cole groaned, but managed to nod. Hart scooped him up like a rag doll. Emily clutched to her chest, Layla following. They edged back through the hatch into the tunnel. Behind them, the heavy door creaked open. Footsteps thundered. Hart's heart stuttered. There was no turning back. She kicked the hatch closed, plunging them into total darkness. Emergency lights overhead still faintly glowed, but the tunnel beyond was black as spilled ink. Using her flashlight, Hart guided them through the underpass, the beams slicing across puddles and broken pipes. Cole coughed, then whispered, "Project Aurora. They use these tunnels to move people. I saw their names on the crates." Layla's small voice trembled. They had monitors, pictures. Hart's mind raced. The sealed corridors, hidden rooms, ambushes, it was all part of a calculated extraction network. Aurora was prepared for every contingency. They reached a ladder rising into a chain-link gate blocking a loading bay. Hart yanked it open. Outside, the night air greeted them like salvation. Rain had slackened to a drizzle, and the fog lay heavy over the hospital's service yard. "Move," Hart hissed, pressing Emily against her shoulder as she guided them toward a cluster of service PD cruisers. Marcus and two officers stood ready, their guns aimed at the darkened perimeter. Detective Marcus called. "We have until the backup arrives." Hart climbed into the front seat of an SUV, tucking Emily onto the bench. Marcus slid in beside her, Layla and Cole in back. Hart's hand trembled as she inserted the key. The engine roared to life. Behind them, dark figures melted into the mist, 3 agents in black suits standing near the hospital's loading docks observing. One raised a hand in a slow wave. Marcus muttered, "They know we have them." Hart's jaw hardened. "Drive, go." The SUV hurtled down the service road, splashing through puddles. Layla pressed her face to the window, watching the silhouettes recede. Emily lay unconscious, her breathing shallow monitors tucked in Hart's coat, indicating her vitals were critical. Cole coughed again. "I have what you need," he said, voice weak. "Project Aurora's manifest. It lists every person they've disappeared, and their next target." Hart pulled the roadmap from the dash. "Show me." He managed to sit upright, pulling a crumpled USB drive from his pocket, different from the one Hart had seized at Willow Lane, emblazoned with Aurora's emblem. "This drive has the locations, but more importantly..." He hesitated, glancing at Emily. "It has the names. You're on it, Evelyn, and if we don't stop them..." He trailed off, pain flickering across his eyes. Hart set the drive in her palm. "We will stop them," she vowed. "I promise." She turned to Layla in the rearview mirror. The child's eyes were swollen with tears, but burning with determination. Hart squeezed her shoulder. "You did good, kid." Layla nodded, voice muffled. "They still have my mom," she said. "They took her too." Hart's blood ran cold. Another parent, another victim. "We'll get her back," Hart vowed. Ahead, the road curved back toward town. Emergency lights flashed in the distance, backup arriving, but Hart knew the streets would be crawling with Aurora agents. The next move had to be precise. She pressed her forehead against the steering wheel for a moment, listening to Emily's faint breaths and the distant wail of sirens. The manifest on the USB held the key to dismantling Project Aurora's network and to finding Michael Hart, the shadowy figure Emily had named. As the SUV sped toward the precinct, Hart's radio crackled to life with a cryptic broadcast. "All units, suspect vehicle heading south. Be advised the target is high value. Do not approach without authorization." The broadcast cut off. Hart's knuckles whitened. "Authorization," she whispered. "They've gone as far as to ask the state police to stop us." Marcus glanced at her, alarm widening in his eyes. "What do we do?" Hart bit her lip. She looked in the rearview mirror at Emily and Layla, the two lives she had sworn to protect. "We go underground," she said, voice low. "We find Aurora's headquarters, and bring this thing down from the inside." She eased onto the shoulder and turned the SUV off the main road, disappearing into an unlit service alley. Behind them, the wail of distant sirens faded, but on the manifest, Hart saw the next name Layla's mother and then her own, and she realized the final confrontation was at hand. A single breath, and then the darkness swallowed them whole. Detective Evelyn Hart watched the headlights of the unmarked SUV fade into the darkness of the service alley, leaving only the distant glow of Millfield's skyline. Somewhere ahead lay the manifest Project Aurora's roadmap of abductions and secret holdings, including the location of Layla's mother and Emily's only known confidant, Sarah. But it also held darker secrets, a conspiracy reaching into every branch of local authority. Hart parked in the shadows beneath an old train overpass, its steel girders echoing with the distant rumble of freight cars. She killed the engine, plunging them into near silence. Emily lay across the bench seat, pale as a ghost, her breathing steadier but laced with pain. Layla sat beside her, clutching a threadbare teddy bear, tiny fingers entwined with Daniel Cole's once strong hand. Hart reached behind the seat for her laptop and plugged in the crumpled USB drive. The little power light blinked, refused to stay lit. She hissed in frustration and yanked out a spare charging cable from her coat. The SUV's accessory port sparked but held. Within seconds, a directory appeared, folders named by date code names she'd never heard. She opened the earliest folder labelled 1/50/22-25, Aurora Initiative, and found a PDF titled Project Aurora Operational Charter. Cole leaned forward, voice hoarse. "Let me read it to you." He cleared his throat. "Contain and neutralize assets showing potential to expose or disrupt the Aurora Foundation's objectives." "That's us," he waved at Emily, at Layla. "We're assets." Hart's knuckles whitened around the steering wheel. On the screen, bullet points detailed facility locations with GPS coordinates, and next to each a number that corresponded to names on the manifest. She cross-referenced Layla's mother's name, S. Morgan, and saw coordinate 41.54321, 70.9243, an abandoned textile mill outside town. But here, Cole whispered, number 10E Hart. "The coordinate is right here," he pointed. The map blinked on a warehouse 2 blocks beneath the precinct. Hart's breath caught. Aurora had a clandestine hub beneath her own police department. Behind her, Emily stirred. Hart reached back and clasped her hand. "You're going to be okay," she said softly, but her voice trembled with fear. Layla's small voice broke the tension. "Are you going to take me to my mom?" Hart forced a calm smile. "Yes, as soon as we move Emily somewhere safe." Her gaze flicked to Cole. "We split up. You and Layla go to the mill. I'll find backup somewhere off-grid and then head to the precinct. We neutralize both sites at once." Cole nodded, swallowing. "It's the only way." Hart extracted her phone and sent an encrypted message, "Need immediate off-book backup, Millfield PD compromised. Call sign, Vulture. Rendezvous at Old Pump Station, 0200 hours." She hit send, then closed her eyes for a moment, steeling herself. At 1:47 a.m. they slipped from the SUV. Hart guided Emily into the back seat of a waiting anonymous van, no Logos tinted windows. The driver gave a curt nod and vanished into the night. Hart watched the taillights fade before climbing into Cole's car, Layla's hand in hers. They drove in convoy toward the textile mill, headlights slicing through fog. The old building loomed like a scar on the landscape, its brick walls covered in moss windows caged with rusted bars. No electricity barred the doors, no alarms screamed, only silence. Cole retrieved a slim crowbar. Hart fitted Layla's teddy into a backpack, then set Emily's location on her phone's map. "Stay behind me," she whispered to Layla. They pried open a side door, the hinges sighing in protest. Inside, the air was stale with rot. Moonlight filtered through grime-filtered panes, casting ghostly patterns on the dusty floor. They moved in single file down a corridor lined with collapsed looms and shattered glass. At the end, a heavy chain secured a security gate. Hart knelt, slipped the crowbar beneath a link and snapped it open. Beyond lay a small chamber illuminated by a single bare bulb. In the centre, strapped to a hospital gurney, lay a woman with dark hair and terrified eyes, Layla's mother Rosa. Layla gasped, sprinting forward. "Mama," she cried. Rosa's head lolled. Hart rushed to loosen the straps as Cole kept watch. Then Rosa's eyes snapped open, recognition flickering. She tried to speak but could only sob. Mummy Layla shrieked, flinging herself into her mother's arms. Hart's radio crackled. "This is Vulture Team on site. Move out now." The tone in the dispatcher's voice was urgent. Hart untied the final strap. Rosa clutched Layla, tears staining her cheeks. "Detective, thank you." Hart reached for the manifest drive. "It's not over yet," she said. "We have to shut down their precinct hub." She pocketed the drive and led them back through the mail's wreckage. Cole stayed to cover their retreat while Hart guided Rosa and Layla to the SUVs parked under the rain-slicked eaves. At exactly midnight, 1:58 a.m., Hart slipped away alone toward the precinct's maintenance entrance, an unmarked door hidden behind dumpsters on the north side. She keyed in the override code stolen from the manifest. The LEDs blinked green. The door clicked open. Inside, the corridors were silent, every camera feed dark or looped. Hart followed her memory of the blueprints, descending 2 flights of stairs to the basement. At the bottom, she found a thick steel door labelled Electrical Substation. She slipped in the black access card and the door swung open to reveal a narrow antechamber, an electronic hub of tangled cable servers, humming UPS units humming softly. And at the back, beneath a tarp, a network switch blinking with active ports. Hart approached her flashlight beam, landing on the rack-mounted router stamped with the Aurora emblem. They'd installed a covert network here to monitor all police communications. She knelt, snapping off the tarp, then jammed her gun into the device and pulled the trigger. Metal-pinged sparks flew. Everything went dark. The hum ceased. An emergency red light bathed the room. Alarms began to wail. Footsteps pounded on the other side of the door. Agents her own colleagues twisted by Aurora's influence were coming. Hart didn't hesitate. She yanked a cable from the switch, grabbed her manifest-laden USB and bolted back up the stairs. Her radio sputtered, "Detective Hart, we have intruders in the sub-basement. Secure the building." The tone was panicked, an unwitting alarm to loyal officers. Hart burst through the maintenance door into the garbage-littered alley. Rain had washed away any clear trail. She paused, heart-hammering hand tightening around the USB. In the distance overhead, the train overpass, she heard the final echoes of looms collapsing in the textile mill as the Vulture Team blew its doors. Moments later, their SUVs tore out into the night, carrying Rosa, Layla and Cole to safety. Hart looked down at her badge smeared with dirt and blood. She was alive. Emily was alive. Layla and her mother were safe. But her own name, etched last on the manifest, still glowed red in her mind. And as the fog swallowed her silhouette, she realised the final move wouldn't be a firefight or a hostage rescue. It would be a reckoning within her own department. The decks had been cleared, the pieces were in motion, and in the dead of night, Detective Evelyn Hart whispered into the rain, "It ends tomorrow." But as the first freight train rattled overhead, she heard a soft buzz from her pocket. A new text message, unknown number. "You should have stayed buried, Detective." Her breath hitched. They had one more move. Detective Evelyn Hart awoke before dawn to the distant thunder of heavy machinery, the sunrise still a pale promise beyond shuttered windows. In the safe house's dim kitchen, she poured 2 cups of coffee, strong black, and sat at the scarred wooden table. On one side rested the manifest-laden USB drive. On the other, her service pistol magazine loaded. She ran a fingertip along the drive's aluminum case, remembering every name, every coordinate, and at the very bottom, her own. Across the table, Daniel Cole, bandaged but resolute, stirred. Layla and her mother Rosa slept on a battered sofa. Emily Morgan, fragile yet breathing steadily, lay in the adjoining room under the watch of a private nurse. For the first time in days, Hart allowed herself a moment of peace. Then she stood eyes on the drive. At exactly 600 hours, the door burst open. 2 men in dark suits, Aurora enforcers, strode inside. Hart reached for her pistol as they raised their hands in a mock salute. "Morning, Detective," one said, voice as cold as steel. "We need to talk." Cole sprang to his feet, but Hart silenced him with a look. She stepped forward, holstering her weapon. "You've lost your mandate," she said. "You'll leave now and no one gets hurt." The enforcer's lips curved. "Your manifesto yesterday took out our field network. We're here to negotiate." Hart's jaw tightened. She pulled the USB drive from her pocket. "I've already handed this over." He glanced around the cluttered room. "Then you understand the price." Hart placed the drive on the table and met his gaze. "I want full immunity for everyone rescued Layla, Rosa, Emily. And for you, if you testify." Her voice was steady, authoritative. The man's eyes narrowed, a generous offer. Suddenly, Cole's phone buzzed. Hart lifted it. An incoming text from an unknown official number. "Internal Affairs has authorized a full investigation into Aurora infiltration. All agents are to stand down." Hart's lips curved into the first genuine smile in days. The enforcer's mask of confidence cracked. He bowed his head. "Terms accepted." Hart retrieved the drive. "Then you're done here." Outside, the early light crept through the curtains as the enforcers retreated, swallowed by the fog. Hart exhaled, the weight lifting from her shoulders. By 0800 hours, Millfield Police Department convened an emergency press conference. Detective Hart, looking worn but unwavering, stepped to the podium, flanked by Chief Reynolds and 2 Internal Affairs investigators. Cameras flashed, journalists whispered. Hart cleared her throat. "In recent weeks, an organisation calling itself Project Aurora infiltrated our city, compromising dozens of cases and endangering lives. Today, with the support of the Department and Internal Affairs, we have dismantled their network. Suspects are in custody. Survivors, Emily Morgan, Daniel Cole, Rosa Morgan and her daughter Layla, are safe and receiving care." A reporter called out, "Detective Hart, what drove you to pursue this so relentlessly?" Hart looked past the microphones at the faces in the crowd. Survivors' colleagues. Strangers hungry for truth. "Because the victim was still breathing," she said softly, voice carrying through the silence. "And as long as there is breath, there is hope." The room erupted in relieved applause. For a moment, Hart closed her eyes, letting the sound wash over her. Justice had been served. Weeks later, the sun was high in a cloudless sky as Emily Morgan brought Hart a bouquet of wildflowers outside the hospital's rehabilitation wing. Emily's throat had healed. Her spirit regained its warmth. Layla and Rosa reunited and smiling played nearby on the lawn. Daniel Cole watched them, tears shining in his eyes. Hart accepted the flowers. "Thank you," she said. "You're doing well." Emily squeezed her hand. "I'm alive because of you." Hart shook her head. "Because of all of us." Behind them, children's laughter mingled with the soft rustle of breeze through maple leaves. The world felt safe again, at least for now. Detective Hart, Chief Reynolds approached Internal Affairs, cleared your actions. You're free to return to duty and to mentorship if you choose. Hart looked at Emily, then at Layla, their joyful reunion igniting a spark in her chest. "I'll stay here a little longer," she said. "Help them heal." The chief nodded, understanding. "Whatever you need, Detective." Hart took a deep breath, scanning the horizon where hospital spires met sky. The fog of fear had lifted, replaced by a clarity she had almost forgotten. The darkness had been vanquished by perseverance, by faith in the victim's last breath, and by the courage of unexpected allies. As she turned back toward Emily and Layla, Hart felt a quiet pride in her heart. The nightmares would fade, but the story, the truth would remain, guiding others out of the darkness. In the distance, an ambulance siren wailed a reminder that this city, like any other, would always need its guardians. Hart straightened her shoulders and walked forward, determined to answer the call. In the final moments, the sun glinted off the flowers in her hand and the hospital windows behind her, heralding a new beginning. If this story moved you, please leave a comment below, subscribe for more true crime documentaries, and share The Victim Was Still Breathing with everyone who believes in justice and hope.